I have the pleasure of introducing the moderator for our session today, Katharine Wilkinson, who is a senior writer at Project Drawdown, where she's collaborated with Paul Hawken on the New York Times bestseller, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. In this book and in many other forms of literature, we know that women and girls are both deeply affected by climate change and also a significant source of solutions for climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. Katharine, in addition to working on Project Drawdown, previously wrote Between God and Green, How Evangelicals Are Cultivating a Middle Ground on Climate Change. So she'll have a lot to offer in moderating this panel with our illustrious speakers, and I'm happy to introduce her now.
Thank you, Anna. So we're going to do something a little bit different in this session than in most. The topic of women and girls and climate change is vast and very multifaceted, and we're going to come kind of into proximity with different aspects of that nexus through the work of our panelists, but we're going to spend just a few minutes with some very kind of high-level pieces of our work at Project Drawdown to kind of set a bit of global context for this intersection generally. So what's in a name, drawdown? In the context of climate, the term refers to the point in time at which the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere peaks and then begins to decline on a year-to-year basis. It is really about a threshold at which we head back to conditions that are most conducive for life on this planet. And living as we are in terra nova atmospheric conditions that the human species has never survived within, we think that drawdown is both the goal that makes sense for humanity in terms of its boldness and its aspiration, but it's also a goal that makes sense to humans, right? To non-climate experts. As an 8th grade boy said to me in October, his description of drawdown was, right? Turn around and go the other way. Drawdown, the book, is a first snapshot of our work as a living research and communication project that focuses on mapping, measuring, and modeling the most substantive existing solutions, technologies, and practices that we already have in hand, we're already using, and asks the question, if we scale those solutions vigorously but plausibly between now and the middle of the century, can we get to drawdown? That's the gist of our work. It's really about kind of putting together a blueprint of what is possible based on the tools we already have in hand. There are 100 solutions in the book, and they really are about reflecting back to humanity our collective wisdom, right? So our work was to use the existing data, the existing research, the existing knowledge that we have, but to gather and codify it and share it back in a way that's accessible to anyone. And probably important context for this session, but background for Drawdown generally, is that we look both at solutions that avoid sending greenhouse gas emissions up, but also those that harness the power of biosequestration to bring carbon back home. And it's in the combination of those two pieces that Drawdown is actually possible. This is a dramatic oversimplification of the work distilled onto one slide. This is what we found. These are the solutions in rank order of their potential emissions impact over 30 years. What I think you start to see when you look at this whole picture of drawdown solutions is that there are footholds of action for every single individual and every single institution on the planet. It really opens up spaces to play on addressing climate change. Some of them have disproportionate benefit for women and girls, like clean cook stoves. But there is also a section in the book And you can see them called out here, that we actually call women and girls because it focuses on 3 solutions that specifically address gender inequities and look at the impact of advancing key rights of women and girls that happen to have positive ripple effects on emissions. Those 3 solutions, the first one is women smallholders. So this focuses on the gender gap in agriculture and the impact that closing the gap in land rights and productive inputs could have on increasing farm yields and avoiding deforestation. The number 6 solution is educating girls, which is about closing the gap on universal education through secondary school. And it goes hand in hand with number 7, family planning, which is about ensuring access to high quality, voluntary reproductive health care, right? So the things that women say they want and need and don't have. These 2 solutions begin and end with rights, and that's reason enough. That's all the reason we need, right, to pursue them. And at the same time, addressing these gaps in education and family planning, that's what will land us perhaps at the UN's medium population projection for 2050 as opposed to the high population projection. So what we've looked at in Drawdown is what's the impact of that additional billion or so feet, pairs of feet on the planet. And we split it evenly. It's about 120 gigatons of avoided emissions. We split it evenly between family planning and educating girls because it's very hard to tell where one leaves off and the other begins in terms of impact. But if you add them together, educating girls and family planning is the number 1 solution to address global warming. So it's, I think, an important, something that people in this room understand well. It is not a very present part of the climate discourse generally. And we hope that Drawdown is helping to shift that and helping to lift up the importance of choice and empowerment for women for many, many reasons and many, many positive ripple effects. And one of them happens to be the aspiration of Drawdown. So I'm gonna stop there, bring up our amazing panelists. Are you ready? Agnes, Leina, Wanjira, Mathai, and Willy, Foote. Would you all come join me? I have to give credit to this, to Jess Search, whose brilliant moderation everyone saw in the opening plenary. I showed her some of the questions we were going to talk about, and she had a good change. So before we get proximate with the work that you are doing, I want to zoom way out. 10-second highline thought. Can we reverse global warming without unwinding patriarchy? We can start anywhere.
No.
You still have 9 seconds.
I'm done.
It'd be hard. Yeah, it'd be hard. Not possible.
Agnes, could we start with you? Would you kind of bring us into proximity with the work that you're doing at this nexus of women and girls and climate?
My name is Agnes Leina from Kenya. I founded an organization called Illaramatak Community Concerns. That's a Mathai word, and it means pastoralist community concerns. And pastoralists, Illaramatak means caregivers, caretakers, or caretakers, whatever you mean. But it is pastoralism, because I come from a pastoralist community. People who depend solely on livestock for their livelihoods, for their food. 50% of food, even more, is accrued from livestock, because pastoralism is a natural capital among the pastoralist communities. And the reason why I started this organization really is to concentrate fully on women and girls. Having grown up as a pastoralist myself, I know and I understand all the problems that young girls can face from childhood until adulthood. And I will thank God for the education that I received through other people. And that's why I started the organization, to do exactly that, give an opportunity, an education to a young girl who could otherwise never have had an opportunity to go to school. And through education of girls, we transform them. Pastoralist girls face many, many problems, especially as they grow up. Their parents, or other pastoralist communities, 80% and above are illiterate. And for an illiterate person to understand what's climate change, they don't even understand. So we have to build capacity, not because they are stupid, but you just go through what we call community dialogue, for them to come to that point where you say, aha, actually we never used to have this proximate kind of droughts. It used to be 10 years before, 5 years before another drought. These days, it goes even up to 10 years. The drought season is becoming more and more, much longer. Like now, we've just had 4 years of no rain in Kajiado, and the last 3 weeks, it's been raining. You should see the joy in the life, in the women's faces, that the water at last, the greenness, their cattle, their cows, their goats are giving birth, and that's the life of a pastoralist woman. But during drought, 72% of their hours a year are spent looking for water. 72% is too much. They have no lives, absolutely. And alongside with that, young girls will not attend school. For that reason, they'll have to drop and go and help their parents to fetch water. Because you cannot watch your mother getting so tired of fetching water, and you're just saying that, okay, every morning you go to school. But when you come back home, even you will be given a 20-liter jerrycan to go and fetch water. So you have no time to do your homework. You have no time to study. Your performance will go down. And of course, the same thing will happen to the boys. But in any way, always, women and girls are affected more. What about imagining the girls again? They come home and they have no water, and without water, you all know the problems of girls, you know, menstrual period and all that. And then you have no water to shower. So tell me if you'll go back to school the next day. Definitely you will not go. You will be laughed at. The boys especially will be saying, so what's smelling here? That discourages a girl completely. And that leads to school dropout. It even leads to early marriage. She doesn't understand what's the need of going to school. Yet that's a natural thing that only God created among us. And then you are expected to have fear of going to school. The next thing, during drought, girls are likely to get married at a very early age. I'll tell you why. For us pastoralists, education is not an emotional issue. For our organization, our key issue is education of that girl. Because education is not an emotional issue among the pastoralist communities, marriage is. So right now, as we talk, I've just told you we've come back from 4 years of drought. It has started raining. So many parents have lost their cattle. And the next thing, a parent will come, just figure this out. As I told you, education is not an emotional issue, marriage is. And a father will come to a daughter and say, my daughter, will you watch me become so poor and laughingstock in the village? What do you expect that girl to say? She'll say, no, father, I will not. So will you say yes to what I'm about to tell you? And in our culture, you're never allowed to say no to your father. And then she will say, yes, father, I am ready for whatever you want. And she would even already have an idea of what next the father is going to say. So you have seen that I've come back with a stick, and that's a very shameful thing among the Mathai community. Coming back with only the stick without the cow is meaningless. You will not stand before the community to even talk. You cannot do any meetings. You cannot come before men. They will laugh at you and say, what are you coming to do? What are you telling us? You even have no cows. And for the girl, that's an emotional issue. I cannot accept and I cannot see my father going through poverty. So the next thing the father says, so I have a friend of mine and I would like you to marry him so that I can get cows, because that's dowry. Suddenly he will become rich. And at least for this season, those cows will give birth and he will become a man again. And then to save face, the girl will say, yes, father, I'm ready. So that girl will drop out of school. That girl will have no career. That girl will have to start the cycle of poverty all over again. Lead the same life that the mother was leading. And yet with education, you are hoping that she will better her life. So as Ilaramata community concerns, we have transformative leadership trainings. Among transformative leadership, in transformative leadership trainings, we tell the girls, you know what? We have to make education an emotional issue, not just the marriage. Make sure that when you go back home, when your father tells you, I want to marry you off, you have something to say. And have the courage to say no with a lot of respect still, because it's considered disrespectful to say no to your parents. Please say no. Learn to say no. We are telling them to learn to say no. And our motto is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will lead you there. You know that book? It's Alice in Wonderland. Yeah. You don't know where you're going, fine, anywhere. Okay, you are fine. So when you come home, you have no goal in life, and your father tells you, I want to marry you off, you will say yes. But if you set goals, so that's what we do in schools, setting goals. Goal setting is our number one approach. Set a goal. So we come to a workshop and we tell the girls, okay, Anna, what do you want to become in life? And she'll say, I want to become a doctor. And then, Chepkorir, what do you want to become in life? She says, I want to become a pilot. And then we tell you, what's your name? My name is Mary. What do you want to become in life? An accountant. So we tell them, start calling yourself that name from today. Start possessing that career from today. So you're Dr. Mary from today. You're pilot, captain, so and so. So when they call me, Agnes, Dr. Mary calling, I feel so proud. So that helps them. When they go home and it has happened, the father will say, I want to marry you off because I do not have cows. My girls have a goal. And they will say, Father, sorry, but today I will say no. Father, please listen to me too, because I listen to you. Father, postpone my marriage. I will marry a person I want. And one day, I will buy for you 5 cows, not the 2 cows you are going to give me away for. And that way, the marriage is postponed. And we do the same to the parents. When we have a session with the girls, we have a session with the parents. And when Dr. Mary says she wants to be a doctor, I will call the father and mother. And we put them all together and say, okay, Mary, what did you say? You say, Father, I said from today, you have to look at me differently. I am Dr. Mary. And then we will tell the parent, can you please pledge to support this girl's education? Most of them have accepted, and most women, you see, you understand, they are illiterate. They do not understand education. They don't have the emotional attachment, and that's what we are trying to create, to make education an emotional issue, to postpone the marriage. We have succeeded to some extent. The country is big. We have succeeded to some extent. Some parents, right now, we have 2 girls. The only problem we have is school fees payment, which we are trying. I am known to be non-sparing to my friends. I just come and say, you know what? Beatrice has not gone to school. She has no school fees. How much money is needed? This amount. Can you please give 1,000, 2,000? And the girl goes to school. Because otherwise, if she doesn't go to school, the father will say, I have no cows to sell for you to go to school. Please come and get married so that I have some cows. And that is how we save the girls from early marriage, from female genital mutilation, because those two go together. A girl must be circumcised for her to get married. We have talked to the Morans, the young men, to postpone that also, and to lift that ban of saying that you have to be circumcised for you to get married. She's beautiful and whole the way she is. Please marry her the way she is. And she will not give birth to children with two heads. That's what we tell the boys. Because if they believe it's a taboo. And said, they don't have four legs. Children born out of by women who are not circumcised are normal, like the children you have also. And last year, we had one of our Morans coming to the UN to actually say that he is ready, and he leads a whole bunch of his age group, the age group of my sons, and I'm a very old woman. And those are the guys who are now saying, we will marry uncircumcised girls. And he went, and the government has recognized that, because this guy went to the CSW in New York through the government, because we invite the government to come and listen to what we're talking about, so that it makes a lot of sense for them also. So that's part of our adaptation. And the women circumcisers have said no. They will not circumcise girls anymore. We take them through what we call community dialogue. If you Google women kata in Kajiado denounces the cat, you will find her there. She's become so famous. And she goes round to tell the others, you know what? Let us not subject our girls to the cat. They even composed a song. Let us subject them to education. And that's what I was saying, make education an emotional issue. And now it is an emotional issue. They sing about educating girls. They accept to educate girls. They have stopped the cat. And we got some seed money to start them off for another business. So we've been given 10 machines by a faith-based organization, 10 machines to make uniforms and sell. So now we are saying, cut the garment, not the girl. So
I think what's so powerful when you talk about your work, Agnes, is that the way in which climate change is not gender neutral becomes incredibly clear. Not gender neutral in the impacts, right, which women and girls are bearing to an unequal extent, that deprives them of agency, and the way in which some of the solutions can be the grounds and source of agency. And I feel like that's really cross-cutting also with your work, Wanjira. Would you, let me give you this clicker, because we have your photos.
she has her own.
If you would take us a little bit into proximity with your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think I often enjoy being on panels with Agnes because she sets the scene so powerfully. It's extremely difficult not to feel proximate to the issue of girls and the plight of women and girls. And the thing is, it's not unique. And what she describes is such a, in Kenya where we come from, it is not a unique situation. You have a situation where the girls that she's describing and the women that she's describing, yes, come from the Mathai community. But in terms of access to energy so that they can do their homework and they can actually have a hot meal at the end of every day is an extremely difficult challenge. So yes, parents need their children home so that they can help with the collection of water and fuel, and those two often go together. So wPOWER, that is a partnership organization that I work with, is really about bringing some of these technologies and making the burden a little bit lighter, because it's not fully eliminated. Making it possible for, in Kenya, and this statistic is repeated quite easily across the southern hemisphere, is that you have about 8 out of 10 people who go through that water collection and fuel collection for 5 to 10 hours a day. And that's a full day's work, and that's one day's fuel, so that the next day the same thing has to be repeated. It's very difficult to do anything else when that's the case. You also have a situation in Africa, for example, and I want to be more specific to Kenya in particular, where I've said 8 out of 10 people are cooking on open fires. Imagine that. 8 out of 10 people have got to spend time collecting that fuel. But on top of that, 7 out of 10 don't have access to clean lighting. And so that also complicates any effort to make, and I love the statistic that you showed, that family planning coupled with education, but you cannot educate children without energy. And so our work is to amplify the work of organizations, and as I scan the room, I see Solar Sister Katharine. It's lovely to see you. Women who are working to bring lighting to the farthest reaches, because those are the people who need them most. And then, of course, yesterday we saw Angaza being recognized for their amazing work in decosting solar. That is a fact. The single most significant barrier to access to either clean cooking or clean lighting has been financing, and has been accessing that technology or the access to the lighting at a cost that makes sense. When you're talking to people, and this is extremely proximate for me, my grandmother, I spent time in Nyeri, spending time around the fire with her. She just loved it when we arrived over Easter and we would sit around the fire in her kitchen. It was smoky as all get out. But we sat in that kitchen and it was warm. It was fun. We enjoyed ourselves. We had warm potatoes go into the fireplace, and you remove them. It was extremely beautiful to see the flame dancing, and we still enjoy that flame today, but in more perhaps sophisticated fireplaces. But it's extremely difficult to move my grandmother from her fireplace to anything different, even as we explain that it is a dangerous proposition to sit in that smoky kitchen for a long time. I spent some time in India. And in India, I was in a kitchen with a woman, and she was making almost 50 rotis every meal for the large family that she had. And her husband, for the first time, sat in that kitchen. Notice, this is not a space that most men will spend time in, but it was his responsibility to purchase all the fuel and certainly the ingredients that she needed to cook that meal. For the first time in his life, he said, I did not know that our kitchen was a killing chamber, that his wife spends time in that kitchen cooking every single day, reducing her life expectancy by dozens of years every year. And so I really feel that the work that wPOWER does in trying to amplify and advocate for clean technologies such as these that you see here reduces this image that you see. This is not an image, this is not a stock image. This is an image of a friend's home in Tanzania. And this image was taken during a funeral, sort of cooking for people who had come into mourning. But I remember every time she shows this image, she says that 20 years ago, this was still happening. It's still happening today. What is it that we are not doing that will change this image so that we do not see this image 20 years from now? That is the big challenge. And wPOWER is working to build the evidence that suggests that women's involvement in the value chain of clean energy is critical in changing this image. It's critical that women are involved not only in the distribution of technologies, but also in the design of these technologies, in the manufacture of these technologies, and certainly in the post-use, in the after-sales service and in the service of them, so that we can begin to get these very women who toil over these fires involved. And for wPOWER, it's extremely important that they not only get involved in their use, but that they develop entrepreneurship ventures. And that's why organizations like Solar Sister, who are members of wPOWER, have found that formula that brings women into the equation, but also allows them to benefit from them.
Thank you. Willy, take us into your work, if you would.
Absolutely. I think I'm supposed to use this other one. See whether it loads. No worries. There we go. Great. Afternoon, everyone. Absolute pleasure to be on this panel. So yeah, I'm Willy Foote, and I'm the founder and CEO of Root Capital. And we provide capital and training to agricultural businesses that increase income and create jobs and opportunity for smallholder farmers across sub-Saharan Africa and as well in Latin America and in Indonesia most recently. So that might be a farmer association or a private enterprise that's exporting cashew or cocoa or shea butter from West Africa. It could be coffee, honey, Brazil nuts from South America, but it also might be a local grain miller or an agro-processor that's buying millet and selling, offering affordable, nutritious foods into local markets. So it just in general, every one of the businesses that we support aggregates hundreds or thousands of farmers, and they make that production more efficient and sustainable in the field on the farm. They collect and process the crops, and then they link farmers to attractive and reliable markets. So against that backdrop, we've developed two important cross-cutting strategies in recent years that explain why I'm on this panel with you, Katharine, with Agnes and Wanjira. So the first is around climate-smart agriculture, and the other, again, very cross-cutting, is a strong commitment to investing in highly gender-inclusive agricultural business. So I'll just kind of give you a little bit of background on both sides. So in terms of climate-smart agriculture, first, roughly 80% of the businesses that we work with are in biodiversity hotspots. So these are precious landscapes in environmental crisis that are suffering from habitat loss or other human interventions. And the headline here is that the agricultural enterprises we support enable farmers to make investments in climate-smart farming practices. And as Root Capital, we amplify those effects by supporting the farmer cooperative, for instance, on the one hand with lending, for instance, for working capital so the farmers get paid well and on time, as well as lending for things like plant nurseries, irrigation, centralized composting plants, water-saving processing facilities, most recently, renovation and rehabilitation of diseased farms that have been hit by increasing temperatures or erratic rainfall, with refurbishing those with new plant stock. We also provide training in environmental management. So that would be, for instance, instructing the agronomists that work inside the business on how to confront urgent environmental threats like disease outbreaks that come from the weirding of the weather, if you will. And it's really about, on the technical assistance side, increasing the farm business ability to provide knowledge and know-how to their farmers, and always with the goal of aligning conservation of soil, water, and trees with higher yield, better quality, and more income for farmers. So that's basically our climate-smart agricultural strategy. It's basically supporting the growth of SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, that enable farmers and rural communities to find scalable pathways to investing in resilience to climate change one farm at a time. Now, the other cross-cutting strategy is investing in highly gender-inclusive agricultural businesses, and the ones that enable women farmers in particular who have very unequal access to productive resources and assets, enabling them to thrive by deliberately creating jobs and opportunities for women within the businesses and also in local communities. So we focus particularly on businesses that have very high percentages of women farmers, women workers, so that might be women working in cracking facilities in cashew sector, women employees like women accountants, women agronomists, and then of course women entrepreneurs and women leaders. Last year the results, just quickly on our Women in Agriculture initiative, was we reached roughly 225,000 women producers by way of serving 102 highly gender-inclusive agricultural businesses, and it's about a $30 million in loans outstanding, which is about 35% of our total lending. Last thing I'll say really quickly is, and I know I suspect this theme will get picked up on more in the conversation, that within those agricultural businesses, we're encouraging and supporting women-led design solutions to opportunity gaps that women in communities and the businesses identify vis-a-vis participation, skills, and leadership. And so most recently, with funding from the IKEA Foundation and a few other donors, we have piloted what are called gender equity grants. And they're grants of up to $20,000 to particularly high-performing gender-inclusive businesses where they can take the grant funding as opposed to debt financing or training and do things like, in the case of Kenya up near Meru, building childcare facilities, daycare facilities next to the macadamia processing plant for working moms. They've used them also to construct safe crop storage facilities that are much closer to women's homes. They've used them for skills, productive skills like crop diversification, making mud bricks, and financial management, and then finally creating savings groups, in particular around those collections centers that are closer. So last thing just to say is we are very humble as an organization. In Africa, not a single expat, all local African teams. But you can get a lot of things wrong if you don't really horse whisper your way, especially around things like gender inclusion, around the unintended consequences. So we've worked very closely with an amazing kind of leading gender research firm called Value for Women, and kind of helping us to understand how can we, for instance, come up as we have with a global policy that when we have a centralized workshop on cash flow projections for 4 days, in the nearest town, that we pay for childcare for all women accountants who are coming and participating. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. The notion of women-led design and transformational leadership both have me wondering, so often when it comes to climate action, we talk about, we need more women at the table, which assumes that the table is still the right place to be. And I'm curious if you all have seen women rethinking or redesigning the proverbial table, not just coming to the table that men have set up and identified.
Well, I think so. I think the table is metaphoric, and there are many tables. When we look at the energy value chain, so to speak, and the different elements of that value chain, you are asking absolutely, get to the, sit on the table, be the table, whatever. But there is a central command point for whether it's in design, in manufacturing, and those decisions are often being made as far away as possible from the users. And this is, I think we've heard about that whole, co-creation discussion, but it's not always done. It's easier said than done. And I really like what you said, Willy, about so often you hear people saying, but women are not available when it's, but what have you done to make it possible for women to be there? Daycare centers, it is really those practical things that allow the equality for women's participation. And it's meaningful participation when they're there and not when you feel like it's important to get their opinion and then you release them. But you have to then invest in making it possible for them to be at the table. So I think the table is important because it shows that there is a place, because there is still a place where these discussions are being held, where those decisions are being made. It's making sure that the right people are there.
Yeah, I just want to say, women are the nurturers of society, even nurturers of nature, and holders of knowledge. Yet, they are the ones who are most affected by the effects and shocks of climate change. And then again, they are the ones who are not even involved in the design, in the planning, and evaluation of programs. And even in value chains, they are always the recipients. They always are the ones who will be the last product will come to them, and whether they like it or not, they were not involved in the design, they were not in the plan, and it's just a business. And then it's like this. I'm a pastoralist. I eat meat, right? But because there's no meat, if you bring fish on my table, even if I don't eat it, what do? I just pick it and eat it. That's now, it's like pushing it down your throat, what you do not even know where it came from. So I don't understand why it's why it's difficult to just involve the women in the whole cycle, even in the value chain. Why not? They can be involved in the manufacturers. Why not? They will say, for instance, the hat, because most pastoralist women are found in the hat. What she showed you there is most African women, it will be in the hat. So what are you designing that's appropriate for me for the hat? Why is it difficult for manufacturers to say, can we have a pastoralist person come in? Can we have a farmer come in? Let's design this project together and see what is appropriate for you and what's not appropriate for you, and it's possible. But it's just not there. Secondly, there are lots and lots of policies being made. Oh, we want this policy and that, this and that. I hear the voice of indigenous pastoralists, local, call them grassroots women, saying, what did I just say? What's that policy? About me? Without me? Mm-hmm. Nothing about me without me. And everything about me without me is against me. Yeah. You cannot be deciding about me. You didn't even consult me. So it's definitely against me. It's like bringing the fish to the table when I don't know how to eat fish. I only know how to eat meat from goat or cow. So that's the kind of discussion that needs to happen. This year in CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women, the theme was participation of rural women. And I was invited to a panel to speak about the decade of the African decade, which is ending in 2 years. I'm sorry to tell you that sometimes you tell people the things that make them uncomfortable. And I just did make sure that I did that. I just said, you know what, it's ending in 2 years, and I'm representing those rural women. They don't know about it. It's ending, but they've not even heard about it. And everybody, I was a panelist like this, everybody is talking about how we've gained leadership, women are involved in this, women, a percentage of women leadership in politics, in that and that. I said, but what are rural women saying? What's the voice of the rural women? Mm-hmm. They are saying, we don't know. We have no clue what you're talking about. You are celebrating a drop in the ocean, because really rural women are the majority, right? Yep. So you're not celebrating the ocean, you're only celebrating a drop. It's easy to talk about the best things that we've done, and it makes us very uncomfortable. Very comfortable to talk about success, nice things. It's such a nice, sweet song to your ears. But the moment you start saying, please start documenting those things which we have not done, it's a bit uncomfortable and difficult. Those are the things we need to think about. The things we have not documented, the things we have not been able to achieve, which is what you're talking about, lack of inclusion and lack of participation of women. In COP23, we are happy about one thing. COP23 achieved gender equality. There is a text. I'm happy about that. But how about the implementation? It's like the Paris Agreement. Oh, we are all, yeah, we have the Paris Agreement. Yeah, excellent. Implementation, zero. That's now where we need to go, right deep inside, the villages where things happen. Because I was telling people that we talk about everything in New York, in the boardrooms, and where exactly the rural women's voice in the boardroom. Let's just go to the drawing board and act with the real people who are being affected by the real problems.
I want you to weigh in on this, Willy, and then we'll make this a more inclusive conversation and start bringing in some questions.
So yeah, I'll just pick up on, talked about fish. I think Socrates said that the fish rots from the head down. If you have a woman at the head of the organization, in our case, agricultural businesses, it can be totally transformative. So just to ground it really quickly, since we have the privilege of being with Daughters of Kenya, we're working a lot now, and this is the last 4 or 5 years, with a super exciting staple grain called sorghum. Yeah. And as you all know, rains are getting more and more unpredictable, and growing seasons are very much in flux, and women typically don't have access to input, seed, fertilizer, safe crop storage facilities, and very inconsistent markets. So in many cases, they just don't plant a lot, and they don't harvest a lot. And sorghum is this amazing example, which I'll just describe, and what I'll get to is the woman there are several women running these sorghum aggregators, but there's a great new market opportunity that sorghum is a very drought-resistant crop. It requires it's way less thirsty than maize, and it grows in degraded soils. It also happens to be an ancient native grain, native to Kenya, and it's highly nutritious. So what's changed in the past 5 years or so? New market access in that East African breweries, which is owned by Diageo, which owns Guinness, designed a sorghum-based beer instead of importing expensive hops and barley. And they're offering a lower cost beer into local markets. And it's created for the first time, really ever, a very attractive and reliable market for women farmers. And so, to your question, what has changed the dialogue around inclusion in business, these kinds of businesses and in the communities, is that there's a woman named Ruth Kinoti who runs a business called Shalem Investments in Meru, in the Meru district, about 5 hours northeast of Nairobi. So she sees this opportunity, and she is from this region. She creates an aggregator, and she lines up hundreds and hundreds of women, sorghum farmers, to sell to East African breweries. But as typically is the case, very little assets. No, what the banks need, she doesn't have. Probably needs some sprucing up in her financial management practices. We came in 2015 with the first loan. Since then, we've done about $1.5 million in credit, lots of financial management training. They now have 7,000 sorghum farmers who are selling forward to, and they've now got a processing plant where they're doing porridge, and micronutrient fortified porridge. The women, we did a deeper impact study on these communities. The women increased their yield through access to seeds and fertilizer, access to tillage and threshing and farmer training and credit and markets. 0.7 metric tons per hectare up to 1.8 per hectare, and 50%, or so rather 85% of the women increased their income by 50%. Since this business began. And it's just a great example of, and maybe just to conclude, I talked about collection centers with these gender equity grants. It was Ruth Kinoti doing, together with the community and Value for Women, the deep dive on how can we change the fundamental enabling conditions for women. Like, okay, guess what? People are literally subject to sexual assault when you have to walk 5 or 6 miles down a remote rural road. What if we put a collection center much closer to their houses? What if we didn't have a lying scale that's rigged by the agents? What if you had a digital scale? What if you had M-Pesa payments, non-cash payments to the farmers? And then what if you design a savings group around the collection center? That was almost entirely driven by the fact that you had a woman leader and women farmers who were designing, based on their understanding of opportunity gaps, how do you go deeper and deeper on impact?
It's such a good example, and such a good example of the many layers of opportunity that are all knit together, I think, at this nexus. You all know the drill: brevity, and also actually a question. And Willy, you've just done such a brilliant job of giving us, really bringing us into the detail of a particular story and a particular success. So if there are questions that raise for you all particular stories, let's also make this storytelling Q&A. Let's start with this gentleman here.
I'm Ricardo Borodich from Argentina. First, I'm very grateful for this session because I learned that climate change and developing programs for education, girls' education and planification, is another reason to work for gender equality or equity that I learned today too. My question to Willy specifically is, I was very interested in the gender aspect of your project and that you develop care places to take care of the childcare units. For us, that's a bottleneck because it's very expensive. So how did you manage to, your project paid for that, donors, alliances with the government? Because normally it's a huge problem.
That's a great question. The way I'll answer that will probably may resonate for Wanjira and Agnes. So this is a relatively new project for us, funded by Kia Foundation, the Wagner Family Foundation, a Boston-based foundation, and it's not a huge amount of capital. But I think that a highlight is we believe deeply in pathological collaboration with unlikely partners. And you need to create a lot of partnerships to drive in the different flavors of capital, from grant funding to private capital investment, impact investing dollars, to be able to meet the whole need, especially when you get deep into these types of issues around childcare and daycare facilities next to processing plants, et cetera. So what we're doing is basically saying we want to pilot and blueprint. What did that look like? How much did it cost? What's the best location? What are the right scales, et cetera, et cetera? And then in this case, very specifically, I've got a good friend named C.D. Glenn, who runs the U.S. African Development Foundation, which is about a $35 million annual grant spend in Africa on very early stage agricultural development. And it's congressionally funded, U.S. funding, and saying, okay, we just did 2 collection centers, but there are literally hundreds of women's groups just selling up through Shalem Investments. Could you 30x it? Because you got much more grant funding than we do, and you're trying to build a conveyor belt. You're building the earliest stage pipeline. So we've identified the need, but it's not really our job to scale that up. Let's get somebody else, and it could be AGRA, could be the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, it could be the East African Enterprise Challenge Fund, but being able to be aware of what the needs are and then cobble together the other pieces of the mosaic together. So it's a great question, and we just want to kind of prototype, blueprint, because everything we do, our end game is replication and adoption by other institutions, including on like a gender equity grant program.
I just wanted to add something to that. I saw in India, and I don't know if this would apply, that even charging a nominal fee to parents, because it's not as if people want you to do this for free. If you create the opportunity, people are willing to pay even a small fee for their children to be in a safe space while they work. And so I think that's also.
In Peru, there's a great experience.
Yeah.
They train a woman, takes care, and everyone pays
contributes
from their job. They
right.
don't lose their job.
Exactly.
So that's a network, community network.
Precisely.
We've got a mic that was running for you, but just missed you. Let's go here and then to the back. Yes, this woman just here in the front.
Hi, my name's Joy Anderson. I lead Criterion Institute. We work on gender lens investing. And this is sort of to the panel in general. One of the things we've been wrestling with, and it's about the table, right? And who is the table? And I love that metaphor. But one of there's a lot of money moving in climate finance. And I sat with somebody who was running a couple $1 billion fund and said, well, have you integrated a gender analysis in how you're looking at climate? And he said, well, if I had to look at climate, gender, and finance together, I'd want to crawl into a fetal position in the corner of a dark room. And this was a partner at Deloitte, right? Not that Deloitte's bad, but so I'm wondering, you talked a lot about policy tables and government tables. What do you see happening in terms of getting this ability to analyze gender and climate at the finance tables, at the places where people are moving money around climate, but many times seem unable to imagine that they might also have to analyze gender in the midst of that.
You want to jump in? I'll take a whack, but I'm going to just try to answer in a narrow way, which hopefully it can, have broader implications. So, very specifically, around climate, we have a kind of its early days, but climate advisory kind of capacity building, and it's partially around agronomic techniques, farm practices. It's partially around digitizing farm level data, that you can bring that up to the cloud, et cetera. But it's also around, kind of to your question, how do you take the climate mapping data around climate change, of which there's a lot. CIAT is the International Center for Tropical Agriculture that we're working with. And kind of to the whole point of this forum, how do you get proximate with that data where it really matters on the ground? So how do you downscale the data to literally that region where maybe they're starting to grow pyrethrum, right? Which is a really interesting crop that's starting to take hold around natural repellents. Or sorghum, or maybe if you're growing coffee and the temperature is going to go up by 2 degrees, or erratic rainfalls, you need to transition into cocoa, which grows below 1,200 meters. Point being, how do you land it in a way that Agnes lands so naturally, reality on the ground with Mathai communities? How do you land through distribution channels what right now feels so overwhelming, all this climate capital, but is it really landing for the folks who have to actually build resilience one farm at a time? And it feels to me like we got to figure out way at scale, how to do things handcrafted at scale, which is like in our case, working with aggregators of thousands of farmers, getting that climate data, getting the Green Climate Fund, getting others to actually invest in smallholder farmers in some way that you can aggregate it up. I'm not answering your question, it's a tough question directly, but somehow that's an example of downscaling climate data tied to a lot of the most sophisticated science to the reality of sorghum or pyrethrum growers in Kenya.
Wow. Did you want to add?
Yes, I just wanted to say there are so many funds, like the GCF, the Green Climate Fund was announced and all that. Some of them are so big, they only go to governments. Yet you have small organizations like ours that struggle to get this money. So you can imagine the bureaucracy, the red tape for that money to ever come to the communities. That is one big problem that we have. But I was telling Wanjira this morning, just do a good job, money will actually follow you. I say that because when I first made a presentation to the Green Justice Resilience Fund, that's how actually I landed here. And just talking about the work that we do, we were asked to present a proposal. And then when I was here, I got, it just depends on the funders now to get proximate with people. The Global Fund for Women asked me to give a proposal. I don't even know anyone, and I don't even know how they knew about our work. But I'm like, gosh, that's the way to go. But they told me to give a proposal on 6th, and I saw the call on 6th, and the deadline was on 6th. I said, impossible, I cannot do it. Because I have visitors, and they followed back. I got an email even yesterday, please, we've extended the deadline for you. It's up to, I thank God for organizations like that. It's up to funders to get proximate, if this is what we're talking about. And the Green Climate Fund, I don't even know how you can ever access that. In our country, it's through NEMA. For people from Kenya, it comes through NEMA, which is a national corporate environmental board. So it's not easy, and it's sad. To be honest with you, it's sad because you imagine, and as I told you, the getting proximate with the, what do I call it, the value chains also. How do you now become the consumer? You're just the consumer of whatever that happens. And people are becoming more and more aware. You go to my village today, we don't have electricity at all. But somehow, not everybody, but some people are beginning to use solar. We have so much solar in Africa, we have so much wind in Africa, but the technology It's not there. Who is going to give us the technology? We are ready to donate a piece of land, because for wind power, you don't need a lot of land. And now we have also the green development mechanisms, the CDMs. The CDMs are so many in the whole world, but there's one that has really succeeded in Africa. You must Google it. It's called Lake Turkana Wind Project. Lake Turkana Wind Project is the biggest ever wind project in Africa. Millions and millions of euros on it. Of course, it has taken so much land. The issue of free, prior, and informed consent and the issue of land and all that also sets in. But the fact remains that is a huge thing. But it's going over the people, and everybody just in the village, no electricity for you, yet you have that wind there. You don't know solar for you. What can that project do, even just as part of their corporate social responsibility, at least to provide something for the villages, you know? Yeah, so.
I'll add just one other piece about perhaps one data point of the power of shifting the narrative, because I think, you know, that there's even a section of the work in Drawdown on women and girls, right? I watch particularly a lot of men go like, huh? Probably the most well-informed, well-resourced climate investment fund in the world told us that Drawdown had challenged them to create a new vertical of investment around women and girls. Wasn't on their radar. They weren't doing it. So, you know, sometimes I think it can seem that just talking about this nexus is inadequate, and yet there's so much education to be done sort of in the climate establishment to even bring people along just to be aware before they actually can begin to act. We were here, and then we're going to come to this woman in the middle, and then this woman on the end.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Coulson. I'm the founder of the BOMA project. Hello, Jambo. We work in the 5 northern counties of northern Kenya. We've been able to reach 100,000 women and children in the past 5 years. We're delivering family planning. We're helping women start businesses. We're working very actively with local people in getting girls educated. Our program is delivered entirely by a Kenyan staff who live in the villages where we work. And actually, Lake Turkana is going to be delivering electricity to the local villages where we are. And we're working very hard with that. But Drawdown was really big for us, especially since we looked at number 6 and number 7 and said, wow, we're doing that. Our new goal is to reach 1 million women and children across the arid lands of Africa, where the greatest impacts of climate change are occurring. And I didn't see in your wheel planting trees. It's probably there, and yet there's huge amounts of capital being unleashed around carbon offsets and planting trees. And it's a question for you, Katharine, in terms of what have you seen out there where we can be unleashing huge amounts of capital for just these 2 criteria, which have such a significant impact, and how do we all come together and advocate for that? We could plant trees in northern Kenya, but that's not going to have the same kind of impact, I think, as these 2 criteria are going to have, and yet people are paying people to plant trees.
Yeah, it's a great question. Some of the sort of simplified titles of the solutions bury information. So forest, both tropical and temperate forest restoration are huge. You know, I think it's a tricky space, right? Because there's such a problematic history, particularly around population control, that talking about the kind of good value of educating girls and family planning as climate solutions becomes a tricky space, I think. And I think there's a discomfort. There's a discomfort there that has good reason. And I don't have the answer to that. I think it's something for all of us to think about, you know, how do we continue to advance these solutions as things that begin and end with rights, and also as really good bets for climate action. Because if we could tap more of the funds that are currently going to planting trees and wind farms and other projects and send it this way, I mean, wow, what a coup that would be for women and girls and for progress on climate. So that's my sense of what's tricky there, and where we need to kind of continue to educate and push the conversation. So we have 10 minutes left. I want to go here and then here because these hands have been up. And let's see how much we can get through.
Okay, hi, Suzanne Beagle, and I'm also an active Gender Lens investor. And Willy, you make me so proud to be a longtime Root Capital gender and agriculture investor and supporter. And this has been an amazing panel. One of the hats I wear is I'm the investment director on the Spring Accelerator, and our design focus is how do we improve the lives of women and girls through business? How do we invest in businesses and support businesses that improve the lives of women and girls? And we get to have someone working on daycare and food and health and financial inclusion under the same accelerator, and people exchanging solutions. And so I really appreciated the examples that you're giving around what are the needs and how are we solving for some of these things. But it makes me think, right, well, there's a daycare company that's figuring out how to do daycare that should be hanging out with the people who are thinking about agricultural, how do we set up daycares, and all of the other places where there are business models that are in one place that aren't getting to spend time with people figuring out business models in another. So where are the opportunities that you guys get, and how can we as funders and investors support you better in that cross-sectionality of these solutions, so that maybe it looked like something that had to be funded by a grant, but maybe actually there is an investable solution. And how is that happening? And are there some other examples that you want to give us?
Wanjira, would you take that one?
Well, I think, Suzanne, thanks for that. I think there are, forums like this are really, for me, where a lot of that happens, that are very deliberately cross-sectional. There's people from the investing space, there are implementers like us on the ground, there are people and everybody in between. I think in Kenya, it's extremely important to engage in those more local forums that are similar, that create opportunities like that, which you just don't hear all the time. I live in Kenya, and I know of a woman who's working on creating daycares in slum areas. And I found out, Emma Caddy, and I found out about her at Skoll last year. She's doing that in Kenya. And so I think it really is a privilege that we get that. But how do we feed that back? How do we broadcast that to a wider audience? I think that's really, really important.
Willy?
Just two quick things. Love this question. We're working, this is not around a daycare for-profit company per se, but embedded talent. How do you creatively embed talent, say in agricultural businesses in rural Africa, and keep your costs really low? So we have a pilot with the University of Ghana and the University of Uganda, where for the agri-processors that might be making soy feed for the poultry industry, or porridges, placing master's students who, as part of their graduation requirement, have a year-long practicum with a stipend from the government into the most rock and roll agribusinesses in rural Ghana. You can imagine for an entire year, and then working, some will know, partners in food solutions, and working with a very senior local African food technologist, and then tapping into 750 years of experience. So it's a really neat example where getting the university, who wants next-gen talent and great ways to school them, in business and other things. The other one is to the question around trees. A really neat way to think about how do we reforest in many places, including in Kenya, let's say. Macadamia nut is having a big renaissance in Kenya right now. Lots of processing facilities, sustainable tree crops, macadamia, cashew, cocoa. If you get a business in place and you got a market, you can reforest. Haiti is going to reforest based on mango, coffee, cocoa, cashew. So that's a really important piece. So it's like the industry itself helps to reforest. And then, of course, agroforestry alongside.
Thank you. Very quickly, please.
Sure. I work for YouTube, and we do a lot of research, user research about sentiment on this topic. And you mentioned fathers and their role in girls' education. But one of the things we found is it's often women and older women, aunts, mothers, that also push for for early marriage and push the girls towards that life. How do you message towards that audience versus the fathers and men in the community?
How do you message to women about girls staying in school?
Oh, yeah. We do what we call community dialogues. And through community dialogues, this is a cultural practice. And now we have what we call Anti-Female Genital Mutilation Act. And I sit in the board in the government for this particular board. And the board says we eradicate female genital mutilation. It's not a disease. It's a cultural practice. You can never, ever eradicate a cultural practice. Early marriage is a cultural practice. You can never eradicate it. And as I said, you must start dialogue to make education emotional, because to them, female genital mutilation and early marriage are an emotional issue. So we do community dialogues. Now we are documenting community dialogues because, as I told you, I sit in the government board so that we can now talk the same language throughout the country. And I'm glad Katharine is here because BOMA also is a very big supporter of the FGM, working with AMREF. You don't know about AMREF, no problem. So yeah, so the community dialogue is where now you talk to them.
Yeah.
Because you cannot coax them. You cannot force them, but you do what we call strategic questioning through dialogue. And then you ask them questions. Why do we do this? And they will tell you, because it's our culture. Why and how did it start? Because our forefathers and our foremothers did it. Why is it being done? Until they come to their aha moment where they'll, after all, indeed it's not necessary. Why are we doing it? This way, that's how we took the cutters through, 55 of them. Training them, just slowly, having dialogue with them and talking to them on a round table and having tea, just talking, how are you cut and how did you feel, or something like that. To them, that's the best topic. We discuss about it. But then eventually, when we try to show them films and show them how bad, they can't even believe, we showed them a live movie from Côte d'Ivoire, and they could not believe how the girls were bleeding and crying, and it's like, why are you surprised? You do exactly that. But it actually helped them to realize, oh my God, is this what we've been doing? Stop it. It's bloody. We don't want anymore. So now we are telling them, cut the garment, not the girl. Not the girl. Not the girl. And then we tell girls, education, not mutilation. That's the strategy. And they actually came publicly in 2016, during the International 16 Days of Activism Against Gender Violence. We actually did the launch in Kajiado. That's the town I come from. By the way, I come from northern Kenya. Katharine knows I come from Baragoi, but married in the south. So you have to bloom where you're planted. That's where I was planted. So when we were doing they came and declared, they burnt the razor blade. It's in YouTube. If you Google the kata, you will find they burnt it, and they made a song, and they decided. In Kajiado now, FGM is on a tipping point. It's going down completely. And on 24th of this month, the chief, because we work with the chief, we work with administrators to make sure no more girl is cut. These days I can sleep without hearing anybody calling and saying, oh, we need to go and save a girl. No. The chief is going to be awarded, and he has been promoted. On 24th, we are going to give them an award because of the good job that they are doing. So it's possible to bring them on board, but through dialogue. It's not easy to end a practical, a cultural practice.
I think this is such an important point actually for the climate space also, which is that you are creating the conditions for people to change their own minds, as opposed to talking at them and what should be. If we can have 2 minutes, I want to close with this question. Climate can be such a hard space to work in, right? The impacts are intensifying. The action is totally inadequate. How do you hold a vision of possibility and stay in this work day after day? 10 seconds.
Hey, that's not fair. So I guess I'm going to anchor it again in a very specific story that went around sorghum in Kenya. That's an example where climate change is driving abundance and a proliferation of better yields, better quality, higher income for women farmers with a market they never had. And one of the drivers of that new economic activity is the fact that it's really drought resistant and it's really nutritious. The other thing I just say as a call to action is I'd love, like this time next year or 2 years from now, one of those audacious projects is these three up here, combining all of our strategies into a cauldron of goodness.
A cauldron of goodness. I love that.
Well, look, we have to cut emissions. This is not a discussion we are having anymore. And I think for us, especially, the urgency of action is where I really often always land. I said we can have all sorts of fun discussions, but the urgency of action remains, for me, one of the most important. And there's one example that always reminds me that it's possible. The mobile telephony has, and will remain, at least for me, one of the examples of how we did it in a sector that we thought totally impossible. In 1980, McKinsey did that study that showed that by the year 2000, only 900,000, and they thought this was an ambitious number, 900,000 phones would be sold in the year 2000. 2000 came, and that number was surpassed in 3 days. It can be done. And then to imagine the leapfrogging that happened in Africa around mobile telephony and the transformation that has had for all sorts of sectors. Almost everybody sitting in here can say that in many ways it has transformed the way we do business in Africa, certainly. This is going to happen in the energy sector. It's happening in solar. We might as well prepare for it. And I think the minute we decost, and that's what happened, the cost of mobile phones went down and the quality went up. Those two things are happening in energy. And as soon as that clicks, we will have a different panel next time.
Wow. As I said earlier, women are nurturers of society, nurturers of nature, holders of traditional knowledge. Yet they're the ones who are most affected by climate change, but there is hope. As I told you, I believe in education. Education, and as I told you about dialogue, these are people who are illiterate. You bring them to book. And right now, we're still doing that. We're even going to in Kenya, we have the opportunity of counties. County by county, especially pastoralist communities, we have our own unique problems. And monocultural economy, just dependent totally on livestock. It's high time that we start thinking about alternative livelihoods. It's not easy for a pastoralist to become a farmer because they just even don't know what to do. But it's possible. And I have hope. Katharine just said that there will be electricity through Lake Turkana wind power. I was getting frustrated. But there is hope. And I thank you for that information because today I have hope, at least where I will, today I sleep well. And the girls' transformative leadership trainings is something we will replicate among all our girls in the counties that we're talking about. And there is an opportunity to do that. So what I want to say is that, and then there is also hope in the funding arena. Thank you for asking a question, how can we help you? How can we better fund you? It's not easy for a donor to ask you that. But these days, we're having what we call co-creation workshops with donors, co-design workshops, so that we just don't have to do what you want, but we do what we can together, so that we have that dialogue together. And it's possible to co-design. And that's what I was talking about, participatory co-designing, where women and men and youth and girls are also involved. in such a way we can move ahead. Nelson what is called Desmond Tutu kept on talking about hope, hope, hope. And someone asked him, you keep on talking about hope. What's this hope you're talking about? I want to say there's hope. Undying hope. And that is now what we must stick to. Yeah. That undying hope. We must continue. Both funders, indigenous communities, grassroots women, and people who are on the ground. Let's have hope, and we will make it. Thank you.
Thank you.